There is a war on our water, our food, and our flowers. With the global push towards highly processed, corporatized foods and the demonization of local farms, grass-fed beef, and localized systems, we desperately need to uplift our health and our happiness from the grassroots. A Japanese saying states, "It is better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war." Embodying the warrior spirit and the innocence of a child, every individual can walk in the garden with purpose, seeking workable ways to co-create a more beautiful world. Planting victory gardens in the midst of a war on agriculture and on culture itself, we can rise like wildflowers. We are free to grow outside. Our health is in our hands. Food freedom and seed sovereignty offer answers to seemingly unsolvable problems. During this series, we will explore food as medicine and natural remedies free from big pharma. We will reveal advice for novice growers from green-thumbed gardeners, permaculture practices that nourish natural beauty, plus playful experiential learning activities and ways to accomplish the divine art of homesteading. Addressing the threats to liberty in related fields, gardeners, farmers, nutritionists, homeopaths, artists, educators, writers, homeschooling parents, and other food and flower enthusiasts will provide exciting solutions. Prose and poetry will illustrate the style of establishing food and flower companions and resisting the urge to pair antagonistic plants and people, requiring proper space to grow. Families of people and plants possess a pure power. The universal language of artful agriculture can create a much-needed momentous unity if growers of all kinds lead by inspiration, not force. Let us unfold interconnected communities from the grassroots, musing on how agriculture can serve as the fertile soil for an organically forming society. I'm Sienna Mae Heath, and this is Food is Freedom.
I am under 5 feet tall, so I might be on my tippy toes here a little bit. I just want to thank you all for coming. I know some of you are familiar with, thank you, my work on Free the People, and my people from Free the People will be here tomorrow, but I'm here to represent us in the meantime. Now, who here has a garden? More or less why you're all here. I know we have at least one homeschooling mom in the back, Miranda, and part of my presentation today will be introducing a curriculum to compare the relationships between plants and the relationships between people. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but in agricultural terms, there is a spectrum between antagonistic to companion plants. And antagonistic is a pretty strong word, right? When we think of unity, it sounds very utopian, right? Like we're just gonna come together magically as a collective, right? The word collective is just all the rage in our New Age circles, and it sounds fine and good. But when we're considering the garden as a map or a blueprint for how we can organize ourselves in a better, more beautiful world, we really have to be realistic about what unity, or if unity is a tall order, what coexistence can look like and how we can function better. So each of you at PorcFest brings your own gifts to the community, right? And like food and flowers of one garden, there is unity in that diversity. And boy, unity and diversity really turn people off these days, including myself, when you hear them in a politicized context. When they're ideologically charged, we see, I don't even think I need to spend 10 seconds explaining it, because that's why we're all here, right? Because we have different visions of what the world can be. We don't want riots, we don't want division per se. We don't want a hyper-racialized society where we focus on our differences, our material differences. And when we focus on the material rather than, in my opinion, the spiritual and the natural, some might call it God's laws or natural laws, that, I think, is what fractures us as a society. I'm sorry, Amy, I saw you stretching back there, and I thought you were signaling to me to do I need to move more? So today I'd like to show you how we can embody coexistence, or if possibly world unity, in a way that actually follows libertarian principles, but also acknowledges when it might just not be possible for us to unify yet under those principles. And there is a sacred individual freedom in the garden. Any of you that has a garden, you know that when you enter that space, you're amidst what some might call God's creation, and you feel like you're in this just perfect perfection, right? Like everything, all is well in that space. But I think it was Joel that was speaking to like that purity in the rural areas and the corruption that happens increasingly on our cities. Still, though, we can grow in urban and rural areas, and I'll get more to that later. As you heard in my introduction to Food is Freedom, the Japanese samurai saying goes that it is better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. It is better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. The garden is sacred ground, friends. And the growth of food and flowers runs deep. It runs deeper than what we see on the surface, and it even runs deeper than what we see among food and flowers. It is comparable to people. Now, when we think of growing food and flowers, this like perfect world comes to mind, but indeed we have antagonistic and companion plants, just like we have amongst people. We have antagonistic relationships, we have those kind of in the middle acquaintanceships, and then we have those companions. And we have companionships here because we unite under a principled vision. But as we know, plants like people don't always get along. We have weeds, we have pests. We have pests in our society as well. And those we can, I don't like to label people pests. I like to think each of us is a food or a flower. But if we're being realistic, we have invasive species of ideologies. We have incompatible subcultures. Otherwise, we would live in a perfect society, which we don't. And all these plants require spacing, proper boundaries, boundary setting, as we might practice as people. Now, it is better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And what I mean by that is to be prepped with the knowledge to, if you desire to homestead, have a small farm, or even as I do container gardening in one of my gardens, and I'll show you some photos of how prolific you can grow even on a patio if you have the proper tools and resources. As I've mentioned, in my opinion, gardening is sacred. It is a sacred ground. It offers a sense of agency and remembering our connection to nature and where we come from. I don't think that people are separate from the natural world. I know there's different beliefs around that, but I do believe in an interconnectedness. And that power that we can reclaim by growing our food and flowers, that can be pure, not corrupt. Power is not always, top-down power. There's something within us and there's something within the earth that charges why we're here. It charges a mission within us. And it's a spiritual act of resistance and creation in a world being reborn. I grew up with the belief in unity and diversity. And so it pains me to see this hyper-politicized vision of it. And why not turn to the natural world instead? Why not turn inward? And consider humanity as food and flowers of one garden. Consider plant diversity first. Contrary to the shallow versions of diversity and unity politically presented in the West, I trust in diversity as a natural strength. And that's hard for us to hear, that's hard for me to say, because I hear people I viciously disagree with using the same language, and that's why I'm so passionate about reframing it. Now, according to nature's laws, unity in diversity requires division. For example, irises must be divided to rebloom, and there are actually quite a few perennials that need to be divided to rebloom the following year. True unity requires discernment, patience, boundaries. Pest control means setting protective limits, a kind of don't tread on me mentality. Timing honors developmental differences. Diversity allows all to thrive together, but with distinct traits as individuals. Context matters, though, and you can't really apply broad principles across the spectrum because each plant, like each person, is different. So mint, as seen here, it's pouring out of a pot. So in a way it's contained, but as it's pouring out, it will root into the earth and become what some might call an invasive species. But if, like me, you grow mint for mojitos or for peppermint tea, then you don't perceive it as invasive. You perceive it as lush, flourishing. And as much as I actually like to call myself an objectivist, sometimes we're faced with subjectivity, and each of us with our different purposes and tastes can consider this very photo as a picture of invasiveness or a picture of a flourishing, healing growth. Now, when contained in a pot to spill out, it can spread its healing scent, which is not only beneficial to us, but it's beneficial to its plant neighbors. The healing scent is healing to us, and it deters pests in the garden. See, maybe not invasive after all. The art of allowing and the discipline of tending both matter. Now, what I mean by that is acceptance of what is. It doesn't mean that you say, okay, this is right, this is wrong. I accept things that I am completely 100% against. But when you're gardening, sometimes you do have to accept things the way they are because you can't fight nature. At the same time, the discipline and leaning into the hard work of creating both matter. Within that microcosm of the garden and within the macrocosm of the shaking world, there's an indigenous prophecy that prophesies a shaking world, a shaking earth being reborn, which I think is the time that we're in. Companion planting, as it compares to antagonistic planting, there's so much relationship wisdom in that practice. As we know, under the banner of PorcFest theme, agriculture is a transformative force. And that's not just in the big picture, in grandeur, events, the largest farms on earth, or Bill Gates buying up all the farms. I think I know for me, when I'm lost in the news, I consider this big grand picture, but then I enter the garden and I see there's this microcosm of wisdom there. What's not often as noticed is how ripe the garden is with method and metaphor. I'm a poet, so I just can't help but see it that way. It offers a universal language, a way to rebuild community across cultures, ages, and even beliefs. In human relationships, as in the garden, companioning and proper space are essential. This is one of my favorite photos. There on the left, it's from a summer camp that I partially ran in Wisconsin. And there you can see we're measuring the wingspans of our hands. And I have rather small hands, but even so, my wingspan here is about 6 inches. Yours might be a little bigger. But generally, actually, humans' wingspan's about 6 or 7 inches. And often you're going to plant 6 inches deep. And rather than break out that mechanical ruler, you can actually use your hands as a measuring tool. So what we were doing there was not only planting deep, but we would measure, 6, 12, and it was just a fun bonding activity. But I digress. What you also see there is a red-orange nasturtium flower. Do any of you grow nasturtiums? They're really good companion plants. They've got that peppery scent and taste, which you can use as garnish on a salad. Just one of my favorite flowers. It deters pests. You can use it down to the root, but it's real spicy when you get down to the root. As I did with the kids, let's consider the seeds of a nasturtium. You grow nasturtium. A couple of you do as well. The seeds are tough. You know, like they're like those people that need a little bit of time or support to open up. I guess they're kind of like introverts, or kind of like libertarians. They don't want to be tread on. They're just not quite ready to socialize and mingle with just anybody. And they require filing and soaking before planting. And that gets them to open up. And it mirrors those personalities, even among the kids. A couple of the kids were chuckling in the back, like, oh, I'm kind of like that. Kind of like that tough seed. It's day one of summer camp. Like, let me just, open up in my own time. Whereas, as we learn, potatoes sprout in the peaceful dark, while the eager volunteer tomatoes embody different paces of readiness, or one might say, awakening. Mature plants, mature is an agricultural term, fitting for people as well. Mature plants have personalities too. Morning glories are like morning people. I'm not a morning glory, admittedly. If there was an afternoon plant, I would be an afternoon glory. But any of you that brave the dawn to wake up for yoga, I guess you're a morning glory of a person. On the other hand, we have moonflowers, which are like the night owls. I like to plant them more or less side by side because the morning glories will bloom, and then in the evening, the moonflowers will shine in the moonlight. It's really pretty. Cabbages, which take up space, cannot be planted near strawberries. Crunchy cabbages are antagonistic to sweet strawberries because the cabbage's roots will release substances that inhibit the strawberry's growth. It's an antagonistic relationship that depletes you. It sucks you dry. Does that sound familiar? But in the plant world, neither crunchy cabbages nor sweet strawberries are wrong per se. It's hard for me to say that as an objectivist, as much as I try to be, but neither coleslaw from cabbages nor fruit salad from the strawberries is wrong. They just contribute differently to the garden's mission, and they suit different tastes. And yeah, if cabbages are planted too close together, they do not follow the non-aggression principle, even within their own families, another agricultural term. But the don't tread on me way of being that the cabbages and even the mint can give actually work well together. One year, it was a rather cold spring, and the mint was just coming up. I had limited space in my garden, so I planted cabbages and broccoli within my mint patch, which was risky because neither follow the non-aggression principle. But I did it anyway because I like to break the rules. And the mint cradled the cabbages as well as the broccoli and protected them from pests. And it was just the perfect family, the perfect microcosm. It was my best brassica harvest ever. However, contrary to the cabbage and strawberry antagonistic relationship, not all relationships are toxic or competitive. Chamomile and cool cucumbers actually make for good companions. The chamomile deters certain pests by attracting beneficial insects like ladybugs and hoverflies, and it enhances the cucumber's flavor. I love learning about how companions not only help each other out in terms of protecting each other and nourishing each other, they can even infuse one with the other's flavor somehow, or just they really have such versatile ways of building relationships. And I think that's true of people as well. If we refer back to the crunchy cabbage metaphor, okay, a crunchy cucumber of a person can be nourished by a sensitive soul such as a chamomile. Now, a lot of us are here because we woke up or were already awakened, so to speak, during COVID. And we've heard already at PorcFest some sentiments around preventative care, food as medicine, of course. And we can practice that principle, that way of life in the garden as well. When I get back from PorcFest, I'm going to inject the adolescent stems of my cucumbers with a syringe, it sounds kind of weird, with a syringe filled with neem oil. Neem oil will keep the pests at bay, but you have to do it soon enough because it's a form of preventative care rather than attempting to solve the problem top down or too late. And when we extend this outward in terms of society, attempting or carrying out the preventative care, it extends to the benefit of the grower, of the family, and of the community, because if you have a bountiful cucumber or squash harvest, any of you that grow squash know that once you get it going, it's hard to stop, then naturally your neighbors are going to get squash put in the back seats of their trucks. I have a friend who had a squash plant grow out of his compost pile, and he named it Susan because it lived a life of its own. And it got to the point where he was just dropping off squashes in the back of people's trucks and on their porches. While this time of year in the mid-spring, approaching summer, is full of growth, inevitably, those new beginnings also allow for the art of letting go. Like life cycles of people, we have death, inevitably death, decomposition. What's really beautiful during this cycle is that the gardener who nourishes life by planting can also revere death through deadheading the wilted flowers and composting what's temporarily no longer serving the garden's grander purpose. Only in the freedom of pruning, strategic letting go, deadheading, removing the old to nurture the new, spacing, boundary setting, integrated care, proactive healing, and companion planting can a garden, and by extension humanity, come together as a thriving ecosystem. So when we apply these concepts to the divided era that we're in, let's not be so quick to demonize the integrative forces, or rather demonize the disintegrative forces and blindly praise the integrative forces. At the same time, we don't want to fall to the decay that we're trying to fight against. You've probably seen like the two sides, quote unquote, in our society begin to mirror each other, right? And that's because when you look into the abyss, you start to have the abyss staring back at you. And while in the garden, it's maybe more holistic, I think when we're out and about, it's good to put our energy into the growth, the integration, and creating a new society. In this new era, there is division. That's hard to deny. But in that space between the two sides, there is room for co-creating a more beautiful world. I hadn't really thought of it this way until recently, because no matter like how much of a growth mindset you have, you turn on the news, you doom scroll on Instagram, and all you see is war. I mean, actually, that is the primary theme of the division as of late. But when we start to fill that space and get curious about that space in between, what could leadership look like? What can we learn from the garden? I think new leadership can look like leading by inspiration, not force, by being inspired by natural laws rather than forcing top down. An individual can live in a way that motivates others to be authentic in their way of life, and so it spreads. And the garden offers a template, a blueprint, a map for that, where plants and principles can be nourished freely. So we as humans have a choice. It's not a long-term choice, it's more of a moment-to-moment choice. We can either lean into community or to go rogue as individuals. Neither are wrong, just as the solo geranium is not wrong for self-sacrificing itself. I don't know if you've ever witnessed this, but geraniums They're not only beautiful, they come in like all these different colors, but they give off this scent that makes them a good companion plant. And specifically, I think their main superpower is that they will sacrifice themselves to a beetle infestation so that the rest of the garden can live. And at times, I feel like the geranium, honestly, in a solo pot. What could I do to almost martyr myself and give up all my social credit if I have anything left to sacrifice and just die for my principles. I think a lot of us can relate to that. But we don't all have to bow down to the beetle infestation. That is the corruption outside of these boundaries. And again, the potato isn't wrong for either seeding in solitude or preferring its own pot, but there is space, there is room between the two sides, between the division, within container gardening and free farm bed, everywhere. We can embody new roles each day, just as plants do. Now again, as a poet, I can't help but find metaphors, and I think that creating community, whether among personalities of plants or people, is a process. It's like preparing soil, making it fertile despite the rocks and the pests beneath our feet. Just as in the natural world, where plants grow as companions or competitors, we too must ask, how can we properly space ourselves to interdepend rather than compete, and co-create a more beautiful, peaceful, and just world? Because the future depends on our capacity to unify without erasing what makes each of us distinct. But let's be real, no perfect world exists, and it might not ever. Even in the microcosm of a family of brassicas that thrived that one spring in my garden. But if we fixate only on resistance without vision, only on, hey, these are my boundaries and don't cross them, we're left frantically just pulling weeds. And we sacrifice our peace. We deserve to smell the roses. We deserve peace. Even those of us that fight for freedom, we deserve peace. And if we don't claim it, there may be little to no harvest at the end of the intended growing season. Dwelling on broken systems without inventing alternatives leads to stagnation. What you focus on grows, and it's wise to be careful not to fall to the decay you claim to transcend. The lesson here is that we are not separate from nature. The warrior within you is not separate from the peacemaker. And, as the Japanese samurai once said, it is better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. As warriors in a garden, let us be fed by peace. I think we've done enough fighting. I think we have so many admirable souls here who have spoken out, become dissidents, become whistleblowers. I spent 2.5 years interviewing whistleblowers and dissidents on Free the People, and time well spent. But every so often, I think we need to check in with ourselves and consider, is this how we want to live for the rest of our lives? Consider this. If we work with grit, we can truly become flowers of one garden, even if they're separate gardens. What could happen if we commit to co-creating a new world, even when we don't get along with our neighbors? And how can you create a sacred, sovereign stewardship in the microcosm of your own life? When we consider how we can create sacred, sovereign stewardship, let's grow together, or separately, you're free. But starting small, you can grow in a window box, outdoors. You can even grow food indoors, contrary to popular belief. I have a free guide, actually, on the 3 superfoods that you can grow in your window. Share seeds, stories, space, and for me, the way I do this is embodying humanity as food and flowers of one garden. We're only halfway through. Give me a second here. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about my story. Before I started with Free the People, I admittedly was quarantined at the start of spring 2020. And I was receiving so many messages asking for gardening advice. That's when I started the Quarantine Gardener, and my blog traffic just went through the roof immediately. And honestly, I think people were admittedly bored, restless, concerned about the shelves emptying on in the grocery stores. Pretty soon, though, I began to wake up because, selfishly, the restrictions affected my ability to buy the plants I needed to grow my garden, because in my home state of Pennsylvania, garden centers were deemed non-essential. Did that happen in any of your states? Vermont? Did it happen here? In the Free State? I'm sure it happened in quite a few. Not here, though. No. Well, good for you. Yeah. Maybe so. But speaking of moving here, maybe spending more time here, I have developed a gardening curriculum which I'll introduce shortly. And I know, like, we have a couple homeschooling moms here who are already introducing gardening into their curriculums. So, just back to the Quarantine Gardener quickly. When I woke up, I transformed the Quarantine Gardener into the Sovereign Gardener for obvious reasons. And there's more to my story, in which you're welcome to chat with me afterwards about. But I'd like to get to how we can apply all this and accomplish the change that we want to see in the world, not just in our gardens and in the microcosm of our lives, but maybe even in our communities or in our families. And I think education is really key. I've been giving workshops in Wisconsin, Arizona, my home state of Pennsylvania. Next stop, I hope, will be in New Hampshire. At the Hillcrest Orchard Camp in Wisconsin, we gathered once in spring and once in the fall, which extended the growing season for the kids so they could see the literal fruits of their labor. And with some of those same kids, we ventured to Desert Rose Baha'i Institute in Eloy, Arizona, and you can see a photo here with one of the girls and an author who participated in the retreat. At Desert Rose, there is a focus on arts and agriculture, which is like where I feel at home, because I was raised in a family of artists, and even though I think art is usually associated with paintings, it's really like, you think of art, you think of paintings, visual art in that sense, I also find gardening to be an art, not only in the way of being, but just aesthetically. You can design it in a way that's really beautiful. Looking ahead to mid-fall, I did an herbal tea workshop at Greenshire Institute, and my next stop was at Little Pond Retreat Center in Nazareth. Now, I'd like to take just some time before our Q&A to show you just an overview of the curriculum. Now, like the metaphors in the universal language of gardening run really deep. So this is just an overview, and then if you want to see me later, I'd be happy to give you a deeper outline that you can implement. So each lesson builds on a principled vision for the garden, and realistic as well, experiencing how certain plants thrive as companions and others thrive separately. The vision nourishes capacity for true unity, creative initiative, and virtues, such as teamwork and patience in action. The curriculum I've called Co-Creating Plant and People Friendships with Youth and Families. When you work with teenagers and you say relationships, they run really wild with the boyfriend-girlfriend narrative. And I'm never doing it again because it just took it to a completely different place. It's fun, with all the teasing, but I think when we frame it as friendships, especially at that age, it's just more unifying and a little bit more grounding. So day one was opening up and exploring personalities of seeds and plants. We soaked bush pea seeds, we filed nasturtium seeds, we cut the eyes of seed potatoes and measured our hands, as I mentioned. And we also dissected the personality traits of plants, as I think we've already gone over, like the crunchy cabbages, the dainty chamomile, and so forth. One herb or weed that I left out, though, was thistles, invasive thistles. This is an interesting one because they have medicinal hearts. They can be medicinal if they're properly processed. And I think people can be like that as well. If you're not a libertarian, I think from the outside, you can be kind of perceived as prickly, don't tread on me, you've got your flag. But within your home and like within PorcFest, we know that we have hearts of gold among us. Day two was companion planting. We began to plant the potatoes inside our perimeter of this garden bed and in pots. You could do the next slide, Olga. And in pots outside of it. We planted geraniums, flowering sage, alyssum, and basil. So just some quick gardening advice. Also the dahlias, the dinner plate dahlias are really beautiful, the big lush ones, but butterflies and bees have a hard time getting to their center. So we planted some dinner plate dahlias, but we also planted the more traditional ones with the centers that the pollinators can reach more easily. Day three's theme was care and kindness, and I love that picture of the kid there wearing my hat with the clay bee pin on it. We continued to care for a garden, learned about container gardening design. If you're in especially a historic town, if you've got a downtown and you see containers of flowers, likely the design is intentionally a thriller, a filler, and a spiller. The thriller being the tall plant, such as a geranium, the filler being the petunia, for example, and the spiller being some sort of vine. And that just really creates a nice texture and depth to each pot. Admittedly, it was more so the girls in the group here that were interested in the design, but like I said, different personalities among plants and people. And finally, we gave the peas a chance. They sowed the peas they had soaked in their pots to take home. Next slide, thank you. We also had what we called teapots. I am not going to make any more plant puns because I think we'd clear out. But we had teapots that we harvested from to have our sleepy time tea at night. And a girl named Luna, who inspired the name of the lavender mint tea, is now in the title of the tea that I sell. So I think the overall theme here is that essentially each person and plant has specific needs for nourishment. And nature's wisdom is something that we can really steep and marinate in. As the psychological and physical war runs wild in our world, I think we should take some time to think about what each of our roles are in all of this. Will you surrender to the destructive forces like the geranium does to the beetles? Admirable, perhaps, but what might happen if rather than a force for a new society, or rather than force a new society, we fight the old? Or each of us diffused a fragrance like roses do to attract community through inspiration, intrigue. What's that? What's that? Could we start this next chapter of America from the grassroots? That's the larger picture. But again, if we narrow it down to the garden, on the ground, boots on the ground, what can we do for each other? What can I do for you? I'm a gardener, a consultant, companion gardener, herbal tea vendor. I'm a writer and podcast host on Free the People, as you know. So anyone interested in coming on Food is Freedom or Real Unity is welcome to contact me or hang out afterwards. The next slide shows my poet-tea parties, where we read and write poetry over pots of tea from my garden. The main resource I think each of you, whether you have a garden or not, I would encourage you to email me for, is the 3 superfoods you can grow indoors. And I do virtual and in-person consultations, companion gardening if I happen to be in your area, writing services to tell your stories. I also make clay bee magnets and sell teas, bees and teas. I've got 3 bees with me if you'd like to get one later. Herbal Tea Gardening Guide is my second resource there for gardening inspiration and learning the healing properties of various herbs and flowers for tea. And the curriculum that I've introduced to you, I have a longer outline that outlines like the virtues and some other lesson ideas that you can implement if you're homeschooling or a teacher even at school and you want to ruffle some feathers. And it outlines the 12 phases for plant and people relationships. So you're welcome to email me, ask me any questions now. I would really love to open it up to a Q&A. We've got precisely 15 minutes. And especially the gardeners, I love to hear about why you started gardening, how, what's gardening's role in your life, and just co-creating a more beautiful world, because I think ultimately that's why we're all here. So if you have any questions, feel free to come up to the mic and let's get this going. Hi.
My name's Sean. Thanks for speaking with us today. So I did miss the first half of your presentation or so forgive me if I'm making you repeat yourself.
Okay.
But as someone who lives in a more like urban area, what would you recommend for like, hey, like kind of getting that intro to gardening when you don't necessarily have a big backyard or the amenities of around here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. I have 2 gardens, one in the ground at a spiritual center, and one that's nearly fully a container garden. I have to admit, I actually prefer container gardening, and I'll tell you why. It's less maintenance, so you're kind of in luck if that's the route that you're headed. I would recommend having, depending on your space, just having like different sized pots and filling them gradually with compost, not just with potting soil from the store, but like just doing some research on fertilizer, compost, if your local area already has compost that they put together. Just make sure you have a good foundation. What are you hoping to grow? Like what are...
Oh, sky's the limit. Maybe some tomatoes, perhaps? Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you have real big pots, you can plant what I'll just loosely call families. Like you can do tomato in the center, and around the tomato plant lettuces, because as the temperatures rise, the tomato will shade the lettuces and create kind of an ecosystem. Plant, for example, basil or mint, as long as it doesn't get too out of hand, there to infuse flavor and distract from pests. And don't be shy about flowers. That's why I emphasize food and flowers of one garden. There's like some sort of teasing and conflict among husbands and wives usually. It's, oh, we don't need flowers. But truly, the companionship between flowers and food is really effective. And just don't be afraid to experiment.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What about things that don't normally grow in a certain environment, like fig trees in a colder environment? What do you recommend, or do you think it's best to just keep things in the kind of environment that they're supposed to grow?
I would say the latter, mainly because in each environment there's just so much you can grow. I do have a friend who grows figs, but she has to bring it in and out every winter. It's just this whole operation. There's a book this is a tangent, but there's a book by Elif Shafak, which is written in 2 voices, one in a fig's voice and one in a young daughter's voice. And it actually, like kind of in a story way, it will like outline the needs of the fig, kind of like humanized. So if you actually wanted to get a sense of how to care for a fig, I think that's actually a really good resource. overall, though, like I don't grow figs, I don't grow lemons, I don't grow limes, but I know people that have luck with it. They just have to bring it in and out. I love the pep in your step.
I didn't want to have any dead time. I really appreciate all the metaphors in the garden. I'm late to gardening. As my age, I didn't grow up doing this, and so it's in the past few years that I started it, and I've found metaphors in growing children and raising children from the garden. My children are already grown, so I found that, so I really appreciate what you brought to that. And I do have a couple practical questions. And you talked about neem oil, and did you say you injected it into the cucumber?
Sorry. Yes, you can inject neem oil with a syringe into what I'll just call adolescent stems of cucumbers and squashes, and it will prevent pests from attacking those plants as they get older.
And it's just sort of like all the typical pests that it will help with?
Yeah, there's like the main ones. The names are escaping me. There's these like terrible white bugs that typically attack cucumbers and squashes. And it's obviously a natural way, pesticide-free to yeah.
Because I've been using that, but I've been spraying on the surface, and I never heard of injecting.
Yeah, well, the thing is like spraying it on the surface, and this goes for a lot of sprays, or I have what's called deer scram. It's a powder that you can spread to deter deer and rabbits. You got to apply it after every rainfall,
right?
And it's just a lot of work. And you're like, even if it doesn't rain, you're gonna lose out on your product.
What about slugs?
What was that? Eggshells. Yeah, eggshells. That's what I was going to say. Yeah, I was going through a phase where I was very diligent about keeping all my eggshells, and you can store them. Like as long as they're dry, you can mash them together, store them in a bag, and when that time comes, use them, yes, to keep the slugs at bay, and you can use them as fertilizer in the soil as well. I like to put them in the soil for my tomatoes.
Because I have been composting them, but I didn't know that was something you could sprinkle on. And does that last throughout the season, or do you have to reapply your eggshells?
You can reapply. It depends on the weather.
Okay. Are there any other natural things you would suggest for organic gardening to prevent?
To prevent? Well, I thought you were going to ask about fertilizer. I would recommend coffee for roses, for example. It's a good fertilizer. Come to me after. I think we could we could talk about more. I'd love to chat more about like practical advice.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you for coming. We've got a few more minutes if there's any more questions or you just want to come chat after. Okay. Well, this is really fantastic that we all get to gather here this week, and I look forward to meeting you if we haven't already become friends. Thank you.